My name is Leo, and I was the invisible son until I shared one 15-second video that cost my brother his $80,000 scholarship. My parents called it a family prank, but for me, it was the end of a decade of silence. Growing up, my brother Julian was the golden child. He could do no wrong even when he was doing everything wrong. While I worked 2 jobs to save for tuition, my parents funneled every spare cent into Julian's image. When Julian bragged about cheating to get his full-ride scholarship, my parents told me to be a team player and keep quiet. But when I saw him mocking my late grandmother's legacy to his friends, I hit upload. What happened next didn't just strip Julian of his future. It exposed the rot in our family's foundation. Before we dive into how one click changed everything, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And tell me, have you ever been the invisible child? Let's go back to the night of the prank. We lived in a house where the walls were a gallery of Julian's achievements. From the framed MVP jerseys in the living room to the shelf of academic plaques in the foyer, you couldn't walk 3 feet without being reminded that my brother was the pride of the family. My school photos? They were kept in a decorative box under the coffee table. Not hidden exactly, but not displayed. That was the theme of my life. I was the background noise to Julian's lead vocals. My father, Marcus, was a high school principal in the next district over, a man who lived and breathed optics. My mother, Elena, was a local realtor who used Julian's success as a talking point at every open house. "Oh, Julian just got accepted into the Honors Society," she'd tell a potential buyer. "We really value excellence in this house." I'd be the one standing in the corner holding the flyers, wondering if she remembered I'd made the dean's list that same week. The disparity wasn't just about who got the most praise. It was about the fundamental rules of the house. Julian was given everything. When he turned 16, a brand new SUV appeared in the driveway because he needed a safe vehicle for soccer practice. When I turned 16, I was told that the bus was character building, and that if I wanted a car, the local hardware store was hiring. By the time Julian's senior year rolled around, the pressure in our house was suffocating. Everything revolved around the Legacy Scholarship. It was an $80,000 award granted by a prestigious local foundation. It didn't just look at grades. It looked at integrity, community service, and leadership. To my parents, this wasn't just a scholarship. It was the ultimate trophy. It would prove that Julian was exactly who they told the world he was. But I knew the real Julian. While my parents saw a dedicated student-athlete, I saw a master manipulator. Julian didn't study, he delegated. He had a rotating cast of friends, mostly kids who were intimidated by him or wanted to be near his popularity, who wrote his essays and did his lab reports. I once walked into his room and saw him paying a sophomore to finish his AP history project. When I told my mom, she didn't get angry at him. She got angry at me. "Leo, don't be jealous," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Julian is a leader. Leaders know how to manage people. You should focus on your own work." That was the golden child shield. Any flaw was reinterpreted as a strength. Any mistake was a learning opportunity. Meanwhile, if I was 5 minutes late for my shift at the hardware store, my father would give me a 30-minute lecture on the rot of the modern work ethic. As the scholarship deadline approached, Julian's system went into overdrive. He needed a perfect capstone project, something that screamed high moral character. He decided to base his application on his volunteer work at a local youth center. The irony was he'd only been there twice, and both times it was to flirt with the volunteer coordinator. I watched him spend hours at the kitchen table, coached by my father, crafting a narrative of selflessness and sacrifice. They were building a lie, brick by brick, and I was expected to provide the mortar with my silence. "It's for the family, Leo," my father would say, patting Julian on the back. "When one of us wins, we all win." But I wasn't winning. I was working double shifts to save for a community college tuition that Julian's scholarship would have covered 10 times over. I was the one who saw the cracks in the foundation, the one who heard Julian laughing on the phone about how easy it is to play the system. The night he received the official notification that he was a finalist, my parents popped a bottle of expensive champagne. They toasted to the golden boy. Julian caught my eye over the rim of his glass and gave me a slow, smug wink. He thought he was untouchable. He thought that because I was the quiet one, I was also the complicit one. He didn't realize that being invisible gives you the best view of everything someone is trying to hide. And I was tired of looking away. The atmosphere in our house leading up to the final scholarship interview was like a pressure cooker. My parents weren't just hoping for the win. They were acting as if it was already theirs. My father had already picked out the spot on the wall for the Legacy Award certificate. My mother had started browsing luxury vacation rentals for the summer, claiming that the money saved on Julian's tuition would be our family victory fund. The scholarship was managed by the Evergreen Foundation, a prestigious group that valued moral excellence above all else. They required a 3,000-word personal statement and a recorded interview. Julian's chosen topic? The price of compassion. My 2 years caring for my ailing grandmother. When I saw the title on his laptop screen, my stomach did a slow, sickening somersault. Grandma Evelyn had been the only person in the family who truly saw me. She was a retired schoolteacher with sharp eyes and a heart that didn't play favorites. When she was diagnosed with advanced Parkinson's, the golden child was nowhere to be found. Julian claimed the smell of hospitals made him anxious, and the sight of her shaking was too much for his mental health. My parents, ever protective of Julian's sensitive nature, let him off the hook. But someone had to be there. For 2 years, I was the one who spent every Saturday and Sunday in her cramped apartment. I was the one who learned how to stabilize her hand so she could drink her tea. I was the one who read her the poetry of Robert Frost until she fell asleep. And I was the one who held her hand when she couldn't remember my name anymore. Julian hadn't visited her once in the final 6 months of her life. Not once. Yet there it was in black and white on his screen. As I sat by my grandmother's bedside, holding her trembling hand, I realized that true leadership isn't about the roar of the crowd, but the silence of service. Those 2 years taught me more about integrity than any classroom ever could. He was literally stealing my life, my grief, and my connection to the only person who loved me unconditionally, and he was using it as currency to buy a future he hadn't earned. The turning point came on a Friday night, 3 days before his final interview with the foundation board. My parents were at a fundraising gala, and Julian, feeling invincible, decided to throw a scholarship send-off party. He told me to stay in my room or be useful and keep the drinks refilled. I stayed in the shadows as usual. I was sitting on the back porch, hidden by the overgrown hydrangea bushes, just trying to breathe in the cool air and ignore the thumping bass from the living room. That's when I heard them. Julian and 3 of his teammates stepped out onto the deck just a few feet away from where I was sitting. They were passing around a bottle of my father's expensive scotch and laughing. "Dude," one of his friends, Cooper, said, "that essay you wrote? The one about your grandma?" My mom read it because she's on the school board and she was literally crying. "She thinks you're a saint." Julian let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through me like a serrated blade. I know, right? I almost couldn't finish the recording without laughing myself. I had to think of something really sad like my car getting a scratch, just to get that emotional break in my voice. "But seriously," Cooper asked, "didn't your brother do all that? I remember you were at every single practice and party those 2 years. Julian took a long swig of the scotch and leaned against the railing. "Leo? Please. Leo does that stuff because he's got nothing else going on. He's a natural-born servant. I just took his experience and gave it a better spokesperson. Honestly, I'm doing the family a favor. If Leo wrote that essay, nobody would care. But when the star quarterback talks about the silence of service, people open their wallets." He then proceeded to do a mocking impression of Grandma Evelyn, shaking his hand violently and slurring his words, mimicking the way she used to try and ask for her favorite book. "Oh, Julian," he whined in a high-pitched voice, "read me the one about the woods again." His friends erupted in laughter. "It's $80,000, boys," Julian toasted, raising his glass to the moon. "Easiest money I've ever made. All it took was a little fiction and a dead old lady." I didn't even realize I had my phone out until I saw the red recording light blinking. I had started filming the moment I heard her name, thinking I might just show my parents so they'd finally see his disrespect. But as the minutes ticked by and he continued to dismantle the memory of the woman I loved for the sake of a laugh, something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. I wasn't the invisible son anymore. I was the witness. I sat there in the dark for a long time after they went back inside. I watched the video. The audio was crystal clear. You could hear the ice clinking in the glass. You could hear the absolute contempt in his voice. And most importantly, you could hear him admit that the entire foundation of his $80,000 scholarship was a lie. In our family, being a team player always meant sacrificing myself for Julian's benefit. But a team doesn't mock its fallen members. A team doesn't build its success on the desecrated memory of its elders. I didn't go to my parents. I knew what they would do. They would call it a lapse in judgment, delete the video and ground me for spying. Instead, I went to my room and opened my laptop. I didn't send it to the foundation, not yet. I uploaded it to a private link first. I watched it one more time. I thought about the hours I spent in that quiet apartment with Grandma, the way she would smile when I walked in even when she couldn't speak. Julian thought he was the director of this movie, but he'd forgotten that I was the one holding the camera. The invisible child was about to become the most important person in Julian's life. Sunday morning was usually a quiet affair in our house, but today the air was thick with the smell of expensive coffee and the palpable tension of a game day atmosphere. Julian's final interview with the Evergreen Foundation was less than 24 hours away. My father had spent the morning acting like a campaign manager, pacing the length of the dining room table, firing mock interview questions at Julian while my mother sat nearby, meticulously lint-rolling Julian's lucky navy blazer. I stood in the doorway, a ghost in my own home, watching them polish the lie. "Julian," my father said, his voice deep and authoritative, "when they ask about the most difficult moment during your grandmother's illness, remember the 3S rule: sincerity, sacrifice, and strength. Tell them about the nights you stayed up helping her with her exercises." Julian nodded solemnly, his face a mask of practiced humility. "I'll mention how seeing her struggle made me realize the importance of community support systems." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "The exercises?" I said, my voice cutting through the performative silence of the room. My parents both turned to look at me as if I'd just interrupted a religious service. Julian's eyes narrowed, but he kept his saintly expression in place for the benefit of our parents. "Leo, not now," my mother whispered, her hand pausing on the blazer. "This is a big day for your brother. Go get some breakfast and let us focus." "I did those exercises with her," I said, walking toward the table. "Every Tuesday and Thursday for 18 months. Julian wasn't there. He was at soccer or out with Cooper. He didn't even know she had exercises until he read the medical chart I left on her nightstand." My father sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an uncooperative employee. "Leo, we've discussed this." Julian was providing emotional support. He was the one who kept her spirits up. He's the one with the vision to turn that experience into something that helps his future. Why must you always try to claim a monopoly on grief? It's not about claiming it, Dad. It's about the truth. The foundation values moral excellence. How is it moral to lie about being a caregiver? Julian finally spoke, his voice dripping with that faux patience that always made my blood boil. "Leo, I get it. You're upset because you didn't get the same opportunities. But I'm doing this for all of us. When I get this scholarship, the money Mom and Dad were going to set aside for my freshman year can go toward your Whatever it is you're doing at the hardware store. It's a win-win. My mother smiled at him, her eyes shining. See, Leo? Julian is thinking of you even now. That was the golden child logic in its purest form. Julian steals my life story, uses it to get a massive payout, and then frames it as a gift to me because he's letting me have the scraps of the money he didn't even earn. But the real knife in the back came 10 minutes later. My father called me into his home office. He shut the door and sat behind his heavy oak desk, the desk where he made decisions that affected hundreds of students' lives, yet he couldn't see the fraud sitting in his own dining room. Leo, he started, the foundation board called this morning. They want to do a character verification call this afternoon. They want to speak to a sibling. To you. My heart hammered against my ribs. To me. Yes. They want to hear about Julian's dedication from someone who lived with him. I've already drafted a few bullet points for you to hit. Mention the late nights. Mention how he handled the funeral arrangements. He didn't handle the funeral arrangements, Dad. I was the one meeting with the director while he was at a beach party. My father's hands slammed onto the desk. The sound echoed in the small room. Enough. I am tired of your petty jealousy, Leo. This scholarship is $80,000. It is Julian's ticket to the Ivy League. It is the crowning achievement of this family's reputation. You are going to get on that phone, you are going to follow these notes, and you are going to be the brother Julian deserves. And if I don't? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. If I tell them the truth? My father leaned forward, his face hardening into a mask I'd seen him use on troubled students. If you sabotage your brother's future out of spite, don't expect this family to fund your alternative path. Your savings from the hardware store? That barely covers books. If you want any help with tuition, any roof over your head this summer, you will do this. You will be a team player, or you can find a new team. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a script. A literal script of lies he wanted me to perform so my brother could profit from my grandmother's suffering. I looked at the paper. I looked at my father. In that moment, the last thread of hope I had for my parents, the hope that they just didn't know how bad Julian was, snapped. They knew. They just didn't care. To them, I wasn't a son. I was a supporting character in the Julian show, and I had just been given my lines. I took the paper. My father nodded, satisfied that he'd managed the situation. Good lad, he said, turning back to his computer. The call is at 4 p.m. Don't be late. I walked out of the office, the script crumpled in my hand. I went to my room and locked the door. I pulled out my phone and looked at the video I had recorded the night before. I looked at Julian's mocking face as he imitated Grandma's tremors. I looked at the script my father had written, full of words like integrity and selfless service. The betrayal wasn't just Julian's lies. It was my parents' willing participation in the theft of my identity and my grandmother's dignity. They weren't just favoring a child. They were weaponizing one son to protect the fraud of another. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just felt a strange, cold clarity. They wanted me to speak to the foundation? Fine. I would speak. But I wouldn't be using my father's script. I had my own evidence. I had the manila folder of digital proof. And in 3 hours, the invisible son was going to become the loudest voice in the room. The 3 hours leading up to 4 p.m. were the quietest hours of my life. I sat at my desk, the door locked, watching the shadows stretch across my floor. In the hallway, I could hear the muffled sounds of my family's preparation. My mother was humming as she set the table for a celebratory dinner they hadn't even earned yet. My father was giving Julian one last pep talk, his voice booming with a pride that felt like a physical weight on my chest. I wasn't just sitting there, though. I was assembling what the training document calls the manila folder, my digital arsenal. I started with the video I'd recorded on the porch. I trimmed it to the most damning 60 seconds. Julian laughing about his fictional essay, his admission that he never visited Grandma, and that final, cruel imitation of her tremors. Then I went further. For 2 years, I had kept a detailed log on my Google Calendar of every visit to Grandma Evelyn's apartment. I had photos of us together. Photos where she was smiling, photos where I was holding her hand while she slept, and photos of the grocery receipts I paid for with my hardware store earnings. I also had the caregiver logs from the home health nurse who came by once a week. I had asked her months ago to sign off on my hours so I could use them for a community service credit. I compiled it all into a single password-protected cloud folder. I titled it, The Truth About the Legacy Scholarship Application. At 3:55 p.m., there was a sharp knock on my door. "Leo," my father's voice was stern. "Get downstairs. The board member, Mr. Sterling, will be calling the house line in 5 minutes. We'll be in the kitchen. You take the call in the study. Remember the script." I walked downstairs. Julian was sitting on the sofa, looking like the poster boy for moral excellence. He didn't even look at me. He was too busy checking his reflection in his phone screen. My father handed me the cordless phone as if he were handing me a weapon he expected me to use for him. "Don't let us down," he whispered. I went into the study and closed the door. I sat at my father's desk, the seat of power in our house, and waited. At exactly 4 p.m. the phone rang. "Hello, this is Leo," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Hello, Leo. This is Arthur Sterling from the Evergreen Foundation. We're conducting the final character verification for Julian's application. Your father mentioned you were very close to the caregiving process for your grandmother. Can you tell us about Julian's role in that?" I looked at the script my father had written. It was sitting on the desk in front of me. Julian was a pillar of strength, it read. He sacrificed his social life to ensure she felt loved. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I have the script my father wrote for me to read to you today. Would you like me to read that, or would you like to know why my brother is currently the subject of a video I'm about to email you?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, Leo. A script." "My father is a high school principal, Mr. Sterling. He understands the importance of narrative. But I believe the Evergreen Foundation understands the importance of integrity. My brother didn't write that essay. He lived none of it. I was the one who cared for my grandmother. Julian spent those 2 years mocking her behind her back. That is a very serious accusation, Leo." Sterling's voice had lost its professional warmth. It was now cold and sharp. "I'm not asking you to take my word for it," I said. I clicked send on the email I had drafted. "I've just sent you a link to a folder. It contains a video from Friday night of Julian admitting the essay was fiction and mocking our grandmother's Parkinson's symptoms. It also contains 2 years of caregiver logs, medical receipts, and GPS-tagged photos proving I was there while he was elsewhere. And for good measure, I've included a photo of the script my father gave me 10 minutes ago." I heard the faint ping of an email arriving on his end. The silence that followed lasted for what felt like an eternity. I could hear the rustle of my parents in the kitchen, oblivious, probably pouring the first glass of wine. "Leo," Mr. Sterling finally spoke, his voice hushed. "I am looking at this video now." I didn't say anything. I let the audio of Julian's laughter fill the silence between us. "I see," Sterling said, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and professional fury. "And you say your father, the principal, coached you to lie about this?" "He told me I wouldn't have a roof over my head this summer if I didn't," I replied calmly. "I have seen enough," Sterling said. "Leo, thank you for your courage. This is not how we expected this call to go, but it is exactly why we conduct these interviews. We will be in touch with your parents shortly. Not to award a scholarship, but to discuss the ethics of this application." He hung up. I sat there for a moment, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The weight that had been on my chest for years didn't just lift. It evaporated. I walked out of the study and into the kitchen. My parents and Julian were standing there, expectant. "Well?" my mother asked, her face lit with a hopeful smile. How did it go? Did you tell him about the nights Julian stayed up late studying by her bed? I set the phone down on the counter. I told him the truth, I said. The smile slid off my mother's face. My father stepped forward, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. What did you do, Leo? I gave you a script. Did you follow the script? No, Dad. I gave him my own script. And I gave him the video of Julian from Friday night. The one where he mimics Grandma's shaking. The one where he calls her a dead old lady to get $80,000. The color drained from Julian's face. He lunged for his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. You recorded that? I record everything, Julian, I said, looking him dead in the eye. Because when you're invisible, people forget you're there. They forget you have eyes and ears. They forget you have a voice. My father moved toward me, his hand raised, his face twisted in a way I'd never seen. You've ruined him. You've ruined this family. Do you have any idea what you've done? I didn't ruin him, Dad, I said, stepping back, not out of fear, but out of a sudden, overwhelming sense of pity. Julian ruined himself the moment he decided a scholarship was worth more than his soul. You ruined yourself the moment you decided a trophy son was worth more than the truth. I just stopped helping you hide the wreckage. The house phone rang. It was the caller ID for the Evergreen Foundation. My father stared at the phone as if it were a ticking bomb. He looked at me, then at Julian, who was now trembling, not with Parkinson's, but with the sheer, cold terror of a golden child who had finally run out of light. Don't bother answering it, Dad, I said, heading toward the stairs to pack my things. I already told them everything they need to know. I had 15 minutes to get my essentials before the explosion truly hit, but for the first time in 18 years I wasn't running away. I was walking out. The explosion I expected didn't happen with a bang. It happened with a chilling, clinical silence. As I walked down the stairs with my 2 duffel bags, the sum total of my invisible life, I found my parents and Julian frozen in the kitchen. The speakerphone was on. Mr. Sterling's voice, usually so measured and academic, was vibrating with a quiet, professional fury. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, Sterling said, the Evergreen Foundation does not merely grant funds. We invest in character. What we have just been presented with, the video evidence of Julian's disparagement of his own grandmother, the documentation of his absence during her illness, and most disturbingly, the evidence of a school administrator coaching a student to fabricate a narrative, is a violation of every ethical standard we uphold. My father tried to speak, his voice cracking. Arthur, please, let's discuss this as colleagues. Leo he's going through a difficult time. He's misinterpreted things. I am not your colleague in this matter, Marcus, Sterling snapped. I am the chairman of a foundation that your son tried to defraud. Not only is the scholarship offer formally rescinded, but given your position as a high school principal, I have a moral and professional obligation to report this attempt at academic and financial fraud to the district superintendent. Integrity isn't a narrative, Marcus. It's what you do when you think no one is watching. The line went dead. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother slumped into a kitchen chair, her face pale, staring at the $200 bottle of champagne that was supposed to toast Julian's future. Julian was looking at his phone, his hands shaking. He had just realized that the world he'd built out of lies was a house of cards, and I had just opened the window. You've killed us, my father whispered, turning to me. You've destroyed everything I worked for. My career, my reputation. No, Dad, I said, pausing at the front door. You destroyed it when you wrote that script. You knew Julian wasn't there for Grandma. You knew he was lying. You just thought I was too small to matter. You thought the invisible son would stay invisible forever. I walked out. I didn't have a car, but I had my savings and a friend from the hardware store waiting at the end of the driveway. I didn't look back at the gallery of achievements in the living room. I didn't need to. The fallout was swifter and more devastating than I could have imagined. Within 48 hours, the video I had sent to the foundation leaked. I didn't leak it, but in a small town where everyone knew the perfect Millers, news traveled like wildfire. Julian's friends, the ones who laughed at his jokes on the porch, were the first to turn. They didn't want to be associated with a scholarship fraud, especially when their own applications were being scrutinized. Julian was stripped of his captaincy on the soccer team. The Ivy League university he had been bragging about sent a formal letter of disenrollment after the Evergreen Foundation shared their findings. He went from being the golden boy to a local pariah overnight. The last I heard, he was taking a gap year that looked more like a permanent retreat into his bedroom, unable to face the people he had spent years looking down on. My father's resignation was announced a week later. The school board didn't even give him the grace of a farewell party. A principal caught coaching his son to lie for $80,000 is a liability no district can afford. He lost his pension bonuses, his status, and the moral authority he used to wield like a weapon. He and my mother moved to a smaller house 2 towns over, where nobody knew their name or the achievements of their son. My mother's real estate business collapsed. Her brand was built on the perfect home image. Once the town realized the rot inside her own home, the listings stopped coming. People don't want to buy a dream from someone whose reality was a nightmare of favoritism and deceit. As for me, I moved into a small studio apartment near the community college. It's not an Ivy League dorm and there are no trophies on my walls. But the air is clear. I'm paying my own way, and for the first time in my life, I'm not a supporting character. A few weeks ago, I visited Grandma Evelyn's grave. I sat there for a long time reading her one last Robert Frost poem. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known since she passed. I hadn't just protected her memory, I had reclaimed my own. The truth didn't just cost Julian $80,000. It bought me my freedom. I'm no longer the invisible son. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who told the truth. And in the end, that was the only scholarship I ever needed. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but it was a necessary one. If this story made you feel something, relief, justice, or even a bit of anger, please let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt like the invisible child in your family? Have you ever had to stand up to a golden child to protect the truth? Drop your story below. I read every single one, and I want this to be a space where the invisible ones finally get to be heard. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing these stories of justice and reclamation. And if you know someone who's currently feeling silenced by their family, share this with them. Let them know that no is a complete sentence and the truth is the most powerful tool they have. I'm Leo and I'm glad you're here. I'll see you in the next one.